Las Vegas is running out of time. Right now, America's most famous desert oasis is teetering on the edge of a catastrophic hydrological collapse. Deep beneath the shimmering surface of Lake Mead, the city has been forced to activate a massive, emergency low-lake pumping station, a desperate engineering gamble, operating hundreds of feet down just to keep the taps running for 3 million residents and tourists. For decades, we treated this desert playground like an infinite paradise, but the illusion is shattering. The water has dropped so low that original 1930s infrastructure, long buried by the reservoir, is staring back at the sun. Imagine turning your faucet during a 115-degree heat wave and hearing only a dry, hollow hiss. When the neon lights stay on, but the water completely vanishes, what happens to the millions of souls trapped in the desert? What you are looking at is not just a climate crisis. It is an impending infrastructure failure of biblical proportions. In this video, we will expose the terrifying reality of the dead pool threshold, the exact point where Lake Mead becomes so empty that gravity can no longer push water through the Hoover Dam. We are teasing a future moment that hydrologists dread. The day the federal government is forced to issue a mandatory mass evacuation order for southern Nevada because the municipal water system has completely lost pressure. How did a modern superpower ignore a century of clear scientific warnings just to keep the fountains dancing on the Strip? Watch closely, because the secret engineering battle happening right now 300 feet below the lake is the only thing keeping Las Vegas alive. Welcome to the Las Vegas metropolitan area. To the outside world, this is a glittering monument to human ambition, attracting over 40 million tourists every year to its mega resorts, world-class entertainment, and sprawling casinos. But beyond the famous Strip lies a booming metropolis where over 2.3 million permanent residents live, work, and raise families. On any given day, nearly 3 million people are relying on the city's infrastructure. Daily life here looks completely normal. Parents drive their kids to school past lush golf courses. Neighborhood community pools ripple in the heat, and master-planned suburbs continue to expand into the Mojave Desert. It feels like any other thriving American city, entirely disconnected from the harsh environment surrounding it. People moved here for the affordable sun, the vibrant economy, and the promise of a modern oasis. You can walk into a resort and see multi-million-gallon fountains shooting water hundreds of feet into the air, creating a false sense of absolute abundance. But this entire civilization is built on a profound illusion. Every single shower, every air conditioning unit, and every glass of water is sustained by a single rapidly drying bucket of water in the desert. The city is completely vibrant, completely alive, and completely oblivious to the fact that its primary lifeblood is vanishing right before their eyes. The illusion of abundance ends at the shoreline of Lake Mead. The specific threat facing this region is known as anthropogenic hydrological collapse, culminating in the terrifying structural milestone called dead pool. Dead pool occurs when the lake's water elevation drops to $895 text feet dollar above sea level. At this critical point, water falls below the lowest traditional outlet gates of the Hoover Dam, turning a once mighty reservoir into a stagnant, unmovable puddle. NASA Earth Observatory satellite imagery reveals a horrifying visual profile. The lake has shrunk to a fraction of its former self, leaving a stark, white bathtub ring of mineral deposits hundreds of feet high against the canyon walls. This threat isn't a sudden emergency. It has been building systematically for over a century, baked directly into the legal framework of the Colorado River Compact. The system is operating at a permanent deficit. Yet, if you ask the average resident on the streets of Henderson or Summerlin, they have absolutely no idea how close they are to the brink. Why? Because southern Nevada has implemented some of the most aggressive, sophisticated indoor water recycling systems on Earth. Because the city recycles nearly 100% of its indoor water and pumps it back into the lake, the local water authority has managed to mask the severity of the crisis from the daily consumer experience. The taps still flow, so the public assumes everything is fine, completely unaware that the reservoir itself is running out of runway. The warning lights didn't just start flashing yesterday, they have been blaring for decades. To understand how we got here, we have to look back to the critical period between 2000 and 2004. This was the onset of the worst southwestern mega-drought in over 1,200 years. During these 4 short years, the hydrological gauges at Lake Mead showed a historic, unprecedented drop in lake elevation, plunging the water level down by more than 100 feet. This dramatic drop exposed the city's upper water intake valves, leaving them dangerously close to sucking air. At the time, leading hydrologists and climate scientists from the prestigious Scripps Institution of Oceanography issued a series of stark, peer-reviewed warnings. Their statistical models calculated a staggering 50% chance that both Lake Mead and Lake Powell could run completely dry by the early 21st century if consumption habits didn't radically shift. They presented hard data showing that the Colorado River's flow was steadily diminishing due to rising temperatures and dwindling snowpack in the Rocky Mountains. But these warnings were profoundly ignored. Regional water authorities, powerful agricultural lobbyists, and real estate developers downplayed the long-term climate projections. They viewed the drop as a temporary cyclical dry spell rather than a permanent shift toward aridification. Eager to sustain the multi-billion-dollar housing boom and keep property tax revenues flowing, decision-makers pushed forward, approving massive new suburban developments and ignoring the mathematical reality that the desert was drying out. Because those early warnings were brushed aside, the crisis escalated into a slow-motion disaster that peaked during the harrowing years of 2021 and 2022. The Great Western mega-drought tightened its grip, resulting in emergency federal declarations that shook the entire western United States. The damage was catastrophic. Across the region, billions of dollars in economic losses piled up as agricultural sectors faced severe water cutbacks, leading to massive crop failures and fallowed fields. But the most chilling visual evidence of the disaster came directly from the receding shorelines of Lake Mead. As the water retreated to levels not seen since the Hoover Dam was filled in the 1930s, the lake began giving up its dead. The dropping waterline exposed long-hidden human remains, sunken boats from decades past, and forgotten historical artifacts buried in the mud. The emotional human impact was devastating for those whose lives depended directly on the reservoir. Marina owners watched their livelihoods literally recede into the muck, forced to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars constantly moving their docks and infrastructure further out into the narrowing channel, until many eventually went bankrupt. The most shocking fact of this disaster occurred in the summer of 2022, when Lake Mead plummeted to just 27% of its total capacity. This triggered the United States federal government to issue the first-ever official Tier 1 and subsequently Tier 2 shortage declarations for the Colorado River, forcing mandatory water delivery cuts to neighboring states and signaling to the world that the system was fundamentally failing. The most infuriating aspect of this crisis is that it didn't have to be a surprise. Government authorities knew about this structural vulnerability from the very beginning. When the Colorado River Compact was signed back in 1922, dividing the river's water among 7 western states, officials based their math on hydrological data from an abnormally wet period in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They legally allocated $17.5 text million acre-feet dollar of water per year. However, historical tree ring data later proved that the river's true long-term average flow was closer to $15 text million acre-feet dollar or less. The system was intentionally engineered on a mathematical lie. More water was legally promised to states and cities than the river had actually produced in modern history. As the modern crisis deepened, this institutional failure continued. For an extended period, the true vulnerability of Las Vegas's primary water infrastructure was downplayed. The public wasn't openly told how close intake number 1 and intake number 2 were to running completely dry and sucking air and mud. The Bureau of Reclamation and local agencies minimized the alarming early warning indicators in public forums to prevent widespread panic, protect regional credit ratings, and avoid crashing the hypersensitive tourism and real estate markets. They chose to manage the optics of the shortage rather than immediately confront the public with the terrifying reality that the math of the desert had finally caught up with them. That brings us back to the present day. According to the latest 2 4-month study models released by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, The long-term trajectory for the reservoir remains incredibly precarious. Despite occasional, heavily publicized wet winters that bring temporary reprieves in snowpack, the fundamental warning signs match the darkest periods of our past. Long-term groundwater depletion, rising systemic temperatures, and massive evaporation rates from the desert heat continue to outpace any short-term replenishment. Right now, automated sensors along the lake track water levels hovering dangerously close to critical operational thresholds. If the lake falls toward the $1,000 text foot dollar mark, the Hoover Dam will reach its operational limit for hydroelectric power generation, causing the turbines to suffer from cavitation and forcing a shutdown of a major clean energy source. To combat this immediate threat, scientists and engineers at the Southern Nevada Water Authority have been forced to play their final card. They constructed and activated an $800 text million-dollar engineering marvel, known colloquially as the third straw. This is a massive, low-lake pumping station utilizing a giant tunnel bored deep through the bedrock beneath the very bottom of Lake Mead. This intake allows Las Vegas to literally drain the final, deepest drops of the reservoir, even if the lake falls well below the levels where other states can no longer access it. It is a brilliant piece of engineering, but it is also a terrifying admission of desperation. We are now actively sucking water from the bottom of the bucket. The scientific community is screaming for immediate systemic change. Prominent climate scientists and hydrologists from the University of Arizona, alongside operational experts from the Central Arizona Project, have issued urgent, unambiguous warnings. They state that the temporary water level bumps from occasional wet years are merely hydrological blips in a long-term, irreversible trajectory toward permanent aridification of the American Southwest. In the comprehensive Secure Water Act report delivered to Congress, researchers detailed the stark vulnerabilities of the entire Colorado River basin. The data shows that the river's flow is projected to decrease by an additional 10% to 30% by mid-century due to warming temperatures alone, independent of rainfall amounts. Experts are predicting that if structural use isn't fundamentally altered across all 7 basin states, the system will inevitably slide into Tier 3 federal shortage reductions. This means catastrophic, mandatory cutbacks to municipal and agricultural supplies that will bypass voluntary conservation and force severe rationing. As one leading hydrologist bluntly put it, we are trying to sustain a 21st century population using a 20th century legal framework on a 19th century river volume. The math simply does not work, and no amount of localized engineering can create water where snowpack no longer falls. If Lake Mead hits true dead pool, the consequences will cascade into a national humanitarian and economic catastrophe. Over 25 to 40 million people across the Southwest rely on this river system for survival, including the 3 million souls in the immediate Las Vegas impact zone. The very first piece of critical infrastructure to collapse will be the Hoover Dam's hydroelectric power plant, instantly cutting off electricity to hundreds of thousands of homes across Nevada, Arizona, and California. As the water pressure in municipal systems plummets to zero, the immediate urban environment will destabilize. Fire hydrants will go completely dry, rendering emergency services helpless against fires in the extreme desert heat. Hospitals will be unable to run critical cooling systems or maintain sanitary conditions, forcing immediate, chaotic mass evacuations of patients. Without water pressure, high-rise resorts on the Strip will become unlivable vertical shells within 48 hours. The regional power grid, already strained by the loss of hydropower, will face widespread blackouts just as temperatures soar past 115 degrees. This won't just be an inconvenience. It will mean the absolute economic death of Las Vegas. Property values will completely vanish overnight, triggering a sudden, desperate mass exodus of millions of immediate climate refugees fleeing a modern metropolis that simply has nothing left for them to drink. The third straw is Las Vegas's absolute final lifeline. There is no fourth straw coming. If the water level of Lake Mead drops below $860, text feet dollar, even this $800, text million-dollar engineering masterpiece will find itself stranded, drawing nothing but dead, unpumpable silt from the muddy floor of a dead reservoir. The city's survival is currently tethered to a single intake pipe buried in the desert dirt. When the final drop of pumpable water passes through that intake, where will 3 million people go? In our next breakdown, we are going even deeper into the crisis, investigating the secret, unregulated underground aquifers being aggressively drained beneath our feet and why they absolutely cannot save us. Time is running out, and the desert is aggressively reclaiming its territory. Share this video right now with anyone who still thinks our water supply is infinite. Widespread awareness is our absolute only defense against this unfolding crisis. Subscribe to the Forensic Disaster Analyst channel right now for more deep analytical dives into the hidden structural emergencies reshaping our modern world. Click the video on your screen now to watch our exclusive investigation into the sinking cities of the American West.